Okay, so back again for another deep dive. And this time we're all past the are they real or not thing.
Right.
With dragons, I mean, it's,
Yeah, that's settled.
that's settled. So now it's, okay, they're real. So what now? What does
Exactly.
that mean, and how are people figuring that out behind the scenes?
Yeah. Well, for today's deep dive, we've got something pretty interesting. It's a declassified intelligence report.
Ooh.
Actually, it's a top secret military report from December 30th, 2027.
Okay.
Think of it as an early assessment
Right.
of what we knew about dragons and what we were doing about them
Got it.
in those early days. And this is, coming straight from the Military Intelligence Directorate,
Wow.
their Special Threats Division. So it's not just speculation.
Right.
This is documented analysis of the situation.
So the title of this report is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Top Secret Military Report on Dragons.pdf.
Very descriptive.
Pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
And it covers what the military was doing, but also what civilian scientists were doing at the same time.
Yeah, which is kind of surprising when you think about it. That's one of the things that really jumped out at me.
Interesting.
These scientists were actually the first ones to encounter dragons.
So today we're going to break down this report.
Yep.
Figure out what it tells us about those first few years after we knew for sure about dragons.
That's exactly how the world reacted and what kind of plans were being put in place.
Sounds good. So how did we even get to this point?
Well, it all starts with sightings,
Okay.
confirmed sightings back in 2025.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is, it wasn't the military who found them first.
Really?
Yeah, it was actually civilian research teams.
Mm-hmm.
They were already out in remote parts of Mongolia doing their thing.
Right. They're already out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And then a year later in 2026, that's when the military got involved.
Okay.
Started their own classified reconnaissance.
So they were kind of watching what the scientists were doing first.
It seems that way. I mean, the report doesn't say that outright,
Right.
but you can kind of read between the lines.
Mhm.
The scientists find something amazing, and then suddenly the military is interested.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's usually how it goes.
pretty much. By late 2027, which is when this report was written, the military stance was observe and assess.
Okay, so not going in all guns blazing.
No. They wanted to understand dragons first, figure out what they could do, how they behaved.
Makes sense.
But they also mentioned neutralization as a possibility.
Right. So like a last resort.
Yeah, if things got out of hand. But the focus was definitely on observation.
Okay, so what did they actually learn from all this observing?
Well, first off, they figured out where these dragons were hanging out,
Okay,
all in remote regions of Mongolia.
that tracks.
And they estimated the population to be around 14 adults and 6 to 10 juveniles.
Not a huge number.
No, not at all. Which probably explains the cautious approach.
Right.
They were also using some pretty high-tech tools to find these dragons.
Like what?
Satellite and UAV thermal imaging. So they were looking for heat signatures.
Exactly. Picking up those dragons from above.
That's smart.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about this this fire thing.
Oh, yeah. The big question.
The dragon fire.
The report confirms it.
Okay.
They detected high-temperature exhalations with that thermal imaging.
So it's real. It's not just a myth?
Nope,
Yeah.
it's definitely real. But here's the interesting part.
Yep.
They describe it as an energy reserve-based biological defense.
Meaning?
It's not something they can do all the time. It takes a lot of energy.
So it's not like they're just flying around constantly breathing fire.
No more like a last resort.
Right.
A powerful defense mechanism, but one they have to use sparingly.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a biological limitation.
And it's important to know that because it affects how we think about the threat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how we prepare for it.
All right. Now, another thing that always comes to mind with dragons is flight.
Yeah.
We usually picture them soaring through the air,
Powerful wings.
Yeah.
But what does the report say about that?
So their analysis suggests that these dragons are more gliding adapted.
Really?
Yeah, not sustained powered flight. So they're probably using air currents and maybe thermal updrafts to stay airborne.
So less flapping, more gliding.
Exactly.
Huh. Interesting. So they're not necessarily going to be attacking us from the sky like we see in the movies.
Probably not. Their movements are likely more localized. Maybe they rely on specific geographical features for lift.
That changes things.
It does, and it probably influences how the military thinks about surveillance and containment.
Right, like focusing on those thermal updraft areas.
Exactly.
So the report also mentioned something pretty interesting about their cognitive functions.
Oh, yeah.
They call them highly advanced.
Which is a pretty big statement.
It is. What makes them say that?
Well, they observe some pretty complex problem-solving skills
Okay.
and even possible pattern recognition of human monitoring tactics.
So they're not just reacting. They might be learning.
It seems that way, which raises some big questions about how we interact with them.
Right. Are we dealing with something that can outsmart us?
Potentially, something to consider.
Definitely. And that brings us to another point the report makes about their behavior.
What's that?
They're territorial.
Oh, right.
And if they're intelligent and territorial and we're over here watching them,
Yeah,
even from a distance,
that could be a
it
problem.
seems like a recipe for conflict.
Definitely. And the report emphasizes that they react strongly to perceived encroachment.
So we need to be careful.
Very careful. Understanding their territorial boundaries and what triggers those responses is going to be crucial.
For everyone's safety.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the military's response wasn't just about observation. They were also developing some active measures.
Right. They mentioned Project Aegis.
Project Aegis, what's that all about?
It's a rapid response containment initiative.
So they're planning for the possibility of having to contain these dragons.
Exactly. And they're exploring some pretty interesting methods.
Like what?
Well, they mention high-frequency sonic barriers.
So using sound to deter them.
Yeah, maybe frequencies that are unpleasant or disorienting to dragons.
Interesting.
And then there's the non-lethal cryogenic suppressants.
Cryogenic suppressants. What are those?
Basically, they deliver a rapid, intense cooling effect.
Wow.
The idea is to temporarily incapacitate the dragon without causing permanent harm.
So like a freeze ray.
Kind of,
Yeah.
but more controlled and less, comic booky.
Right, of course.
But it's still in the experimental stage. They're
Yeah.
still figuring out how to make it work.
Okay, that makes sense. And I imagine the military is also thinking about the weapons potential of all this.
Oh, yeah. That's a given. They're looking into whether they can replicate or adapt the dragon's thermogenic properties.
You mean the fire?
Yeah. Basically trying to figure out if they can weaponize dragon fire.
Which would be a huge deal.
It would. But as of late 2027, they hadn't figured out how to do it safely.
So it's still a theoretical possibility.
Exactly. A big technological hurdle.
Right? Now, this report isn't just about the military. It also talks about civilian researchers.
Yeah, and how the military's keeping tabs on them.
That's interesting. Why would they do that?
Well, they're embedding operatives within these research teams.
Really?
Yeah, under non-disclosure, of course.
So the scientists don't know they're there.
Not entirely. They know there's some military liaison, but they don't know the full extent of the operation.
Wow. So they're basically spying on their own scientists?
In a way, yes. But it's more about gathering information and potentially guiding the research in directions that are useful to the military.
Okay. I can see the logic there.
Yeah, it's a classic intelligence approach.
So who are these civilian scientists?
Well, there are a few key players mentioned in the report.
Okay.
One is Dr. Evelyn Moreau. She studies dragon cognition and social behavior.
Interesting.
And the report assesses her as having moderate recruitment potential. They think she might be willing to work with them more directly, but she's also cautious about government oversight.
Makes sense. She's a scientist. She wants to do her research.
Exactly. So their approach is to offer her academic grants or indirect support.
A little more subtle.
Much more. They're trying to influence her research without being too heavy-handed.
Clever.
Yeah. Then there's Dr. Alexander Thorne.
Oh.
He's focused on field operations.
Out in the field with the dragons.
Yeah. And the report says he has low recruitment potential.
So they don't think he'll cooperate?
Not likely. He's skeptical of the military and probably wouldn't want to classify his findings.
So what do they do about him?
Increase surveillance.
They're watching him.
Yeah, keeping a close eye on him. They see him as a potential source of uncontrolled information.
So they're worried he might leak something.
Exactly, or do something that compromises their operations.
Wow. And who else is on their radar?
The last one is Dr. Caldwell.
Okay.
He specializes in metabolism and physiology.
So the biological side of things.
Yeah, and the report says he has high recruitment potential.
They like him.
He's interested in practical applications, which aligns with the military's goals.
Right. They want to be able to use what they learn about dragons.
Exactly, and Dr. Caldwell's expertise could be very valuable in that regard.
So they're probably going to try to bring him into the fold.
Most likely. The report recommends further evaluation, which suggests they're seriously considering him for direct collaboration.
It's fascinating how they're approaching this whole thing with the scientists.
It is a mix of observation recruitment and a little bit of manipulation,
Yeah.
all to ensure they have control over the situation.
So after all this assessment and planning, what are the main recommendations of the report?
Well, first off, they want to collaborate more with those select civilian researchers.
Like Dr. Caldwell?
Yeah. but they want to keep it classified.
Of course.
So they're going to use things like academic funding and conservation efforts as cover.
Right. Makes it look less suspicious.
Exactly. Then they want to establish covert containment zones.
Containment zones.
Yeah. Places where they can control dragon movements if necessary.
So basically dragon prisons?
Not exactly. More like managed areas.
Okay.
And they also want to set up early warning systems to track dragon movements.
So they know where they are at all times.
As much as possible. It's all about being prepared.
Makes sense.
And lastly, they're pushing for research into thermal resistance materials.
For protection against dragon fire.
Exactly. And sonic deterrence technologies.
Keep them away from certain areas.
Yep, it's a multi-pronged approach.
Very thorough.
Yeah, they're taking this seriously.
So what's the overall status of this whole operation?
Well, as of the end of 2027, it's called Operation Scale Watch.
Operation Scale Watch. I like it.
And they're still in the surveillance and assessment phase.
Okay.
Direct engagement is a last resort. They're focused on containment and the potential for scientific exploitation.
It's basically a long game.
Yeah, a very long game.
So just to recap,
Mm-hmm.
we've got dragons in Mongolia confirmed.
Yes.
Both civilian scientists and the military are involved.
Right.
We've learned a lot about their biology and behavior, and the military is working on ways to contain them and potentially exploit their unique abilities.
All very true. This report gives us a fascinating look into the early days of how we responded to the reality of dragons.
Yeah. It's like a behind-the-scenes glimpse into something most people don't even know is happening.
And it raises a lot of questions about the future.
It does.
Yeah.
Because if this is just the beginning, what comes next?
What happens when we learn even more about them?
Right. What are the ethical implications of trying to control and exploit a species as intelligent as dragons seem to be?
Yeah. And how will the world change as we continue to learn about and interact with these creatures?
That's definitely something to think about.
A lot to ponder.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But we'll be back soon with more fascinating explorations into the unknown.
Until then, keep looking up.
And stay curious.